The thing is, when we're little, we don't know anything different than how we've been raised. And that's why when we grow up and get into 12-step recovery programs, we don't understand that what we endured as children is not normal. At least many of us don't. I didn't understand a lot of the things that I learned in my family were dysfunctional. They just were. I definitely didn't understand that I'd been traumatized, and it was probably 6 months into recovery before I really started to understand that the absence of good things happening can result in trauma, and therefore I was traumatized. Part of adhering to the rigid beliefs of our families is that we stay in the dysfunctional family system, which is traumatizing. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where I help people heal their emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds and make deep, lasting changes in their lives. I'm the founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting, LLC, where I coach people on how to develop healthy boundaries. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any particular 12-step fellowship. I also don't believe that 12-step recovery is the only way to recover. You might need additional help. My hope is that you'll find my words concretely helpful in improving your life, whether you're in recovery or not. This is episode 186. The Origins and Effects of Adult-Child Trauma, Part 2. This episode is a continuation of last week's episode 185 on the origins and effects of adult-child trauma. So if you haven't already listened to that one, stop this and go back and listen to it. I'm continuing to read from the book Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is affectionately called the Big Red Book in the fellowship ACA, which stands for Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. I'm reading from Chapter 10, The Importance of Service, which doesn't seem like it would be the chapter that goes this deeply into what happens in dysfunctional families that results in childhood trauma, but it does. And that's because this chapter is essentially one of the identity papers that was written at the formation of the ACA Fellowship. That is, it was written to help define what the issues are that are dealt with in the fellowship and what differentiates ACA from other fellowships, and why service is so important in this fellowship as it is in all fellowships, especially as the fellowship was forming. Last week, I ended off talking about the origin of emotional intoxication. I'm going to pick up on page 356. I made the mistake last week of saying that I was reading from page 55, and I was actually reading from page 355. So now I'm on page 356, and I'm going to do what I did last episode, which is read a section directly from the book and then comment on it. So this first section is entitled Underlying Terror. We continue in our obedience to an alcoholic view of the world because the expected consequence of disobedience is more terrifying. Disobeying the rigid beliefs of our childhood means to risk being overwhelmed by unpredictable chaos. We cling to the familiar pattern of unthinking reactions and see anything new as a source of confusion and a threat to our tenuous sense of control. We avoid the terror of abandonment by holding fast to our childhood beliefs, but pay the price of enduring the abuse which comes from following the family's distorted idea of reality. End quote. The lines in particular from this section that stand out for me are, first, disobeying the rigid beliefs of our childhood means to risk being overwhelmed by unpredictable chaos. So this is why we have black and white thinking. We don't know what else there is besides the beliefs we've been given by our families. That means we have to buy into these rigid beliefs. We're not going to try to buck against them because to us, this is what is. One way to think about this is like in the animal world, Baby animals really get on a cellular level. I'm going to die if the big animals are not around to protect me. And the same is true for humans. We get on a very deep and profound level that if I don't obey the big people, the parents, then I'm on my own and I'm screwed because I'm little and I don't know how to operate in the world. So one of the ways we placate those big animals, our parents, is that we go along with whatever beliefs they give us. And to think otherwise is just beyond our capacity. It is unthinkable. One of the other things that stood out to me in this passage is as we cling to the familiar pattern of unthinking reaction, we react without thinking about it. In other words, we are reacting out of fight or flight mode. We're being reactors rather than actors. And that is one of the patterns that's enduring in adulthood when we've grown up in dysfunctional families. The problem with that is that when we're in fight or flight mode, we can't think clearly because we can't access the frontal lobe of the brain where our higher order thinking is done. And that's because we're not meant to access that lobe of the brain when we're in fight or flight mode. We're meant to take action. That is, to fight or to flee. We're not meant to think because of the amount of energy required by the brain to think. And it's so great that that part of the brain has to become inaccessible when we're in danger because we need to fight or flee. We need all of that energy to get to safety. And because we're used to living in fight or flight mode all the time, which is not normal, by the way. We're not meant to stay in that state for extended periods of time. It's meant to be temporary. We become used to being in this pattern of unthinking reactions, which is why learning to pause is such an important part of recovery. For me personally, it is my number one tool of recovery because I literally cannot use any other tools of recovery until I pause. One of my earliest episodes is about pausing. I will put a link to that in the show notes in case you haven't heard it. For me, pausing includes taking a nice, deep breath so that I can get back to regulated breathing. The way I think of it is that when I get back to a regulated state, I've told my body I am safe. And that is what enables me to come out of the unthinking reactive patterns. Another line that stood out for me in that section was, we pay the price of enduring the abuse which comes from following the family's distorted idea of reality. The thing is, when we're little, we don't know anything different than how we've been raised. And that's why when we grow up and get into 12-step recovery programs, we don't understand that what we endured as children is not normal. At least many of us don't. I didn't understand a lot of the things that I learned in my family were dysfunctional. They just were. I definitely didn't understand that I'd been traumatized, and it was probably 6 months into recovery before I really started to understand that the absence of good things happening can result in trauma, and therefore I was traumatized. Part of adhering to the rigid beliefs of our families is that we stay in the dysfunctional family system, which is traumatizing. The next section is entitled Believing We Cannot Be Loved, and it used to be entitled Consequences of Codependency. Here's what it says. The cost of our continued allegiance to alcoholism is the loss of our ability to love. We lose our capacity to give and receive love as a result of failing to resolve the violent conflicts that threatened to destroy our families. We internalize these conflicts and carry them into adulthood, constantly seeking to control the unmanageable chaos inside. We no longer feel able to provide for our own well-being or to contribute to the well-being of others. We develop a profound sense of inadequacy in giving and unworthiness in receiving affection and love, since nothing we did as children seemed to have any effect in stopping the progressive deterioration of the family. Our sense of failure increases until we believe our inadequacy extends to everything we do. We lose faith in our ability to love and care for ourselves and feel worthy of receiving warmth and love from those around us. We accept our feelings of unworthiness as a definition of who we are and continue to let the insane perceptions of alcoholism distort our view of the world. End quote. This shit is so fucking heavy. I put a bracket around that last paragraph and wrote in all caps, "This is fucking horrible." I have the bulk of this section underlined and some of it double underlined. This really helps me to understand why so many adult children feel deeply and inherently flawed to the core of their being, as if they are not worthy of love, as if they don't matter, as if they can't make a difference in their own lives. The reality is, however, we are all beloved children of God. We are all deserving of love from God, from other human beings, from our families. We didn't get that love from our families because they weren't capable of giving it to us. It's not because we were undeserving. Now, because we were little, we internalized this lack of love as I didn't get love because I don't deserve love. Well, I'm here to tell you, dear listener, you do deserve love. It does not matter what you have done or not done in your life. It does not matter who you are, who you've been, or who you are going to become. You deserve love. You deserve love from yourself, from other human beings, and especially from God. And that is why this recovery stuff is so damn important. And why the solution to childhood trauma and adult child syndrome is to become your own loving parent. In other words, we get to learn how to truly love ourselves in ways that make us feel loved. The next section is entitled Powerless and Alienated. When children have been injured by alcoholism and cannot find relief from their pain, they are forced to deny their reality and to withdraw into isolation. The experience of being powerless to control the events that damage us as children leaves us with a deep feeling of alienation, not only from others, but from our own openness and vulnerability as well. Now, this immediately brings to mind the fact that so many people in recovery talk about always feeling completely apart from everyone else. And often in substance use problems, people say, when I drank the drink or I ate the food or I took the drug, I felt like I was a part of for the first time. I felt like I got this thing that everybody else did. Now, this part about denying their own reality really connects for me why my worst effect of growing up in a dysfunctional family was questioning my own perception. I just did not have clarity about this is what this means. This really happened. This is reality. For those of you who may not be familiar with Tony A's version of the 12 steps, he was the founder of ACA. In step 2, rather than saying we are restored to sanity, Tony A's version in step 2 says we are restored to clarity. And I think that is so fucking on point because I had a lack of clarity about so many things. I was confused about things all the time, partly because of the gaslighting from my family, partly because we were not allowed to ask questions in my family. We were just supposed to know stuff, partly because of being little and only being able to think concretely. And I think adults often forget that kids think concretely, but adults think abstractly, and they talk about things in the abstract. For example, there's a lot of symbolism in our language, and there are a lot of words that sound the same but have different meanings. So as a kid, I was often like, what are they talking about? I didn't know that there were 4 different versions of the word there for many years. And then there was the fact that my father said things to me like, I'm gonna knock you into next week. Now, I remember when I was really little thinking that meant that he was going to hit me so hard that I would fly through time. Now, I knew that was really fucking hard. I didn't understand that he meant, I'm going to hit you so hard that I'm going to knock you unconscious for so long that you will wake up next week. Now, for many reasons, I did not really understand what was real and what was not real. And it was just fucking crazy making. And then we come into adulthood and we're supposed to be able to take care of ourselves, to make sense of our lives. And then you go into the workplace and you try to figure out, how does this part of the world work? And for much of my life, I assumed I had to read into things because I'd been reading into things my whole life. That reminds me, when I was doing the steps the first time, my step group realized, oh my God, the reason that we want other people to read our minds is because we think that's how it works. Because we've been trying to read other people's minds our whole lives. Now, never mind that we've been wrong about reading other people's minds. We just didn't really understand about directly communicating with people. I remember before recovery, when I didn't have healthy boundaries, and I would encounter people with healthy boundaries who directly communicated what they liked and didn't like, what they wanted and didn't want. I thought they were rude assholes. I just thought they were dicks. I didn't know that direct communication is actually a healthy mode of communication because I had never experienced it. All right, the next section is a feeling and an unfeeling self. To protect ourselves from the disorienting effects of living with confusion and pain, we divide into a feeling and unfeeling self and isolate ourselves from our own vulnerability. We alternate between the extremes of wanting to escape our isolation and the need to stay securely hidden in our familiar prison of pain. Our beliefs and behaviors become rigid and inflexible, and we swing from the depths of isolated depression to frantic attempts to find help in the outside world. We endlessly repeat the cycle of frustration, rage, and despair, but the goal of the divided self remains the same as it was in childhood, to become whole once again and to find happiness, peace, and joy. End quote. This paragraph speaks directly to the name of this podcast, Fragmented to Whole, because that was my experience before recovery. I have this notion of feeling like I was a bunch of fragmented pieces floating around in space. And through the process of 12-step recovery, those fragmented pieces were then integrated into one coherent whole. And now when negative things happen to me, I can be rocked by them, but I can't be shattered by them because I'm no longer fragmented. When difficult things happen to me, they don't take away from my wholeness. Now, where it says we alternate between the extremes of wanting to escape our isolation and the need to stay securely hidden in our familiar prison of pain, what that makes me think of is I did a lot of isolating before I got into recovery, as I think everybody who's in recovery did before they got here. I would have these times of just utter fucking loneliness. I remember I got a cat at one point because I was like, I just need another being to be with. And another time I had this friend, we were both super depressed. This was back in the time of answering machines. And if you had a message, a light would blink on the answering machine to indicate that you had a message. And I said to her, listen, please just call me. You don't have to say anything because I just want to see the light blinking on my answering machine. It was so meaningful to me to see that because I was so disconnected from other people. And she never fucking called me. And of course, I got mad at her, but then I didn't call her either because I was also super depressed and it was really hard to take action. Early in my recovery, I came across a quote by Paul Tillich. I have no idea who he is, but this is the quote. Loneliness expresses the pain of being alone. Solitude expresses the glory of being alone. Now, I think I had glimpses of solitude before I was in recovery, but I definitely had a lot of experience with the loneliness before recovery. I do have an episode about that. It's about the difference between isolation and healthy alone time. I will link that in the show notes so that you can learn more on my thoughts about that. Anyway, when I started to grasp that there was a way to be alone without being lonely, that was really helpful to me. I heard another quote recently from somebody, I am with myself now, not by myself now. And I think that it expresses my experience now. I am not so fucking isolated from other humans anymore. Now, when I'm alone, I'm in solitude rather than being lonely. The next section is entitled Challenging Authority. Freedom from insanity requires that we disobey the guidance of dysfunctional authority. The process of breaking away from alcoholic authority starts with the idea that disobedience is possible. End quote. We can't even begin to make change unless we believe that change is actually possible. This is a very important reason for going to 12-step recovery. Because there we see and hear people whose lives were like ours, but they've changed. That's why sharing our stories is so important in recovery. So newcomers can identify with us and see they're in the right place and that we know something about what they've experienced and we're living proof that change is possible. The next section, which is the last section I'm going to read, is Defiance, a Natural Response to Abuse. Stanley Milgram, in his study of obedience to authority, writes that a single individual has little way of knowing that defiance is a natural and appropriate reaction to being abused. The horrified reactions of others are needed to define the abuse as painful and intolerable. With the support of those who have successfully resisted authority, a single individual can see that the expected consequence of disobedience does not necessarily occur and that the power of authority is weakened by each successful act of defiance. Milgram concludes that unity and mutual support are the strongest bulwarks against the effects of abuse by authority. End quote. Now, this helps us to understand further why the group nature of 12-step recovery is so fucking important. We need to see evidence of other people who have changed their patterns of behavior and who have not died from making those changes and have, in fact, gone on to thrive. We initially think there isn't another way, or we think that things are not abusive or not traumatic. But then when we get reflections back from other people in recovery that it doesn't have to be that way. There is another way. You can have peace and serenity. You don't have to live in fight or flight mode all the time. You don't have to put up with people's humiliating, abusive bullshit behavior. You actually can change your behavior patterns. You can change your relationship patterns. You can learn to accept and give love. All right, that's about it for this episode. If all of this stuff is new to you and you want to learn more, I highly encourage you to check out the ACA Fellowship. I put links in the show notes. There are also links to 3 pieces of literature, all of which are less than a page, and I highly recommend that you read them to determine, if ACA is the right fellowship for you. And I also put a link to Tony A's steps in the show notes in case you'd like to read about those. I was recently reminded by a friend that when I first started recovery, I didn't feel lovable. I almost can't believe that I used to feel that way and that I kind of forgot something so profound because I truly love myself now. And I want that for everybody. If you don't love yourself, there's literally nothing that can make up for that. I created something exclusively for my private clients since many of them don't love themselves. And I've now opened up my private vault to share it with up to 10 people individually. It's called the Self-Love Sprint. You'll grow to love yourself and truly feel worthy so you can stop saying yes when you really want to say no. Stop neglecting yourself and putting everyone else first. Stop saying all kinds of nasty shit to yourself. That is not what people who love themselves and feel deserving do. You'll stop being afraid that others will think that you're selfish for taking time to care for yourself. This is also for you if you don't really know who you are because you've always been such a fucking chameleon. Go to higherpowercc.com/love sprint. Remember, I'm only offering 10 of these, so don't wait. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did or you wouldn't still be listening, then you're gonna love the other things I have to offer. If you'd love pre-release podcast scripts and episodes before anyone else gets them, or if you'd love access to content from my private vault that I developed exclusively for my private clients, which is like having a work session with me without me actually being there, go to patreon.com/higherpowercoaching. There are 3 tiers ranging from as low as $4 up to $24 a month. You'll also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has content very similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. Please like and subscribe to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet. I'd also love it if you'd leave a review, which you can do either in the show notes or on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find my podcast so they can get the benefits you've gotten from listening. If someone came to mind when you listen to this particular episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run group and private coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net, where you can hop onto my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. My ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I would love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.